Welcome to Keeping Up at the Capitol with Senator Tom Casperson. This program comes to you each month from Lansing with issues and events important to the UP. This month, Senator Casperson discusses recent legislation to empower waterfront property owners with the right to groom their privately owned beaches, with Save Our Shoreline President Ernie Krieger and Save Our Shoreline Legal Counsel Dave Powers. And now, let's join Senator Casperson and his guests.
Well, I want to welcome our viewers to Keeping Up at the Capitol, and I want to introduce our two guests. We've got Ernie Krieger and Dave Powers with us today, and the topic is beach grooming and the legislation that was just recently passed that all of us worked on. And maybe we could start a little bit by both of you introducing yourselves and a little bit about your background. Ernie, maybe you could start.
Well, my name's Ernie Krieger, and I'm the president of Save Our Shoreline. I'm also a Bay County Commissioner for the 5th District, and back in the early times of the year 2000, we had an issue going on with our shoreline, and with a couple informal meetings, we started the group called SOS. I live in Bay City.
Dave?
And I'm Dave Powers. I'm an attorney in Bay City with the law firm of Smith, Martin, Powers, and Nyer. I helped Ernie form Save Our Shoreline in 2001. And I served as vice president for 8 years, and I also served as attorney for the group, and I'm no longer vice president, but I still serve as attorney for the group.
What I'd like to do maybe is just set the stage with how we've kind of come together on all of this, and that is I come from the Upper Peninsula, I'm from the Escanaba area, and this certainly is an Upper Peninsula issue, but the fact that you're nowhere near the Upper Peninsula in the sense of where you come from,
right?
Kind of proves the fact that this really was a statewide issue. Is that a pretty fair statement?
I would say, I mean, we're in a situation where the summer of the year 2000, when I came home from work and went on my tractor to groom my shoreline, which I had done for, better part of 30 years, a neighbor came over and said, did you get your letter? And I said, what are you talking about? So he went back into the house and brought a letter out that said that what I was doing was in violation of what was called the Clean Waters Act. And he asked me what I was going to do about it, and I said, well, I'm going to continue to clean my beach because I feel that I had a right to do that. Save Our Shoreline represents over 3,000 households that cover all the Great Lakes that we have around in our area. So it was pretty passionate in the Bay City area. That's where we first got our first strike with the government coming in and trying to tell us what we could or couldn't do with these unreasonable regulations.
And I was watching from afar, seeing that there were these meetings going on. I'd read the newspaper, see that Ernie was hosting a meeting somewhere in Bay City, and I was following it closely. I'd previously started a landlords organization when we had trouble with government back in the 80s. And I had a neighbor come by and say, Dave, you know that Ernie's got these meetings going on and you really need to get involved, I think. And so I went to one of the meetings, and not too far after that, we were forming Save Our Shoreline.
And what really brought everything together for us to help get a voice for the residents of Michigan was another gentleman who was an intricate part of what we call the Three Amigos, and that's our commander, Joe McBride, was a naval commander, retired, lawyer, builds medical centers, very well versed on law. He came to one of the meetings that Dave was at, and the three of us sat back and talked about it, and they all said what they could do, and I said what I would do.
I knew Joe was going to be helpful because I had all these boxes full of information that I was carrying into the meetings and carrying out. And Joe, the first thing I saw, he said, can I help you carry one of those boxes? And he's been helping us carry the boxes ever since.
Yep.
Talking about the information, I'd like to tap into that for a minute, because what I noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you dealt with this a lot longer than I have, but a lot of what seemed to have unfolded here was the fact that things changed, rules changed to a degree that I don't think there was a lot of legislative involvement. I don't think the elected officials were involved in this to a heavy degree once this thing got rolling. It seemed more like departments started deciding this is how we're going to impose certain things, and this is how we're going to regulate really your life and how you live in your area if you have a beach. And for me, that was pretty frustrating based on what I was hearing from my constituents. Did you run? Is that your kind of perspective of what was unfolding?
Yeah, one of the first things we had to do is we saw these letters coming, and they were citing laws, and so we had to do the research. And they were actually relying on several different laws, and we were able to narrow it down that really there were only a couple that even came close. One of the things that we found was that back in 1999, the MDEQ had done a memorandum, and it indicated that they had this problem, they wanted to regulate the beaches, and they really think that they can use these two particular laws, Wetlands Protection Act and the Great Lakes Submerged Lands Act, to regulate. And it suggested to me that prior to that, they weren't really relying on those laws to regulate beach grooming, and that's what we observed, because there was nobody trying to stop us from beach grooming prior to 1999.
Correct. I have a neighbor that's been out there probably 50 years at least, and he's always groomed his beach. And so for these people in Lansing to come to us on our beaches and tell us they weren't a beach, they were a wetland, we had a real major problem with.
Well, that issue is something maybe we should talk about too, because the viewers understand what we were doing here, what our motivation was, and what our goal was. And one of the things that came out of it for me that was very clear, and in fact, I think some of our success was, I believe, the director of the department, the new director, actually started understanding it too, and that was that a sandy beach versus a true blue, muddy, soiled wetlands are two separate issues.
Correct.
And yet, the way the department appeared to be regulating was if they were all exactly the same. And so the folks that had the sandy beaches, and for many years, as you mentioned, Ernie, about grooming your beaches, we had the same thing up in my district.
Sure.
Where folks for many years lived on the beaches, loved the beach. It was their retirement. It was their goal to end up there. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, their whole world got turned upside down because of some regulations that came out saying they couldn't. Is that a fair statement? And did you run into that where all of a sudden it was like a shotgun blast and we're going to regulate everything exactly the same?
Correct.
The regulators were telling us the entire Saginaw Bay is a wetland. There are no beaches on the Saginaw Bay. And so that's what we were reacting to.
Yep. And the sad thing is there's small networks of homes up and down that shoreline that were allowed to build and remodel and build and maintain their beaches for so many years. Now to have somebody come and tell you that you really don't live on a beach, you live on a wetland, it's like my response always was to those people, well, I live at 785 Applin Beach, not 785 Applin Wetland.
Right.
It's like, what don't you understand? And I think they felt that if they said something enough and they believed what they were saying, that it was actually going to be factual. A statement made was, well, you don't own that property from what they considered the ordinary high water mark to the water's edge. And we proved to them, and actually there were decisions made that reinstated the fact that, yeah, if my deed says I own to the water's edge, I do. And when we had to go against two different bureaucratic groups, that being the DEQ and the Corps of Engineers, it became extremely frustrating for us to try to, do what they wanted us to do. In fact, to the point where we just said enough's enough, and here we are.
And Ernie touches on an important point. That's one of the reasons why this legislation was so important. We were faced with going with two agencies and battling with two agencies about these issues. And it would be a lot easier if we only had to deal with one agency.
Now, I don't know in the Thumb area if they deal with, if you have any situations like we had over in northern, on the west side of northern Lower Michigan, but what I found out through this process also was the fact that the Department of Natural Resources in this case, where they had state beaches, state-owned state beaches, they actually were out there with mechanical grooming devices like you talked about doing for many years with your property.
Yep.
And we're grooming the beaches. And I had maintained all the way through this process, I'm glad they can do that. I want them to be able to do that so the public can go enjoy those beautiful beaches. So that's a good thing that's in place. But I had a lot of heartburn with the fact that our government could do it, but our government was also going to private landowners with sandy beaches saying you cannot use mechanical devices to groom your beaches. I had a real problem with that. And Was there any issues like that over your way?
You know, it started, there's a big beach for the public in the Caseville area. So when all these new regulations were coming down, they had to apply for permits. And they were actually denied a permit at the Sleepers Park, I believe it was, in Caseville. And then all of a sudden, we got actively involved, and next thing you know, they got their permission to groom their beach. But unfortunately, in Bay County, where we have a state recreational area, campground and shoreline, and our shoreline's 1.25 miles long. It's a healthy length of beach. At that time, they were only grooming 650 feet. That was it. And so we were able to put the pressure on the DNR there to find a way of allowing us to groom some additional frontage, which is now up to 1,200 feet. But the unfortunate thing is it's at the furthest end of the shoreline. You know, so people coming in with young families, it's not very practical for them to make it all the way over to where this shoreline's at. There's no running water, there's no bathrooms. It makes it very difficult. So we're still in the process of, we'll say, doing battle to fight for that shoreline to get our beach back to what it once was. And it was definitely a great destination point. And in Bay County, we have no inland lakes. That's our only access to the water is at that state park, and it's unfortunate that it is the way it is today. But like everything else, we've been into this for at least 12 years. We're not about to go away, and at some point, that state park will come back to what it used to be.
There was at first a double standard from what we could understand between public beaches and private beaches. We did a FOIA request, Freedom of Information request regarding the Tawas Beach, and we found out that the Corps of Engineers, in response to their request for a permit, the Corps of Engineers said, you don't need a permit to groom this beach. Since then, we've done FOIA requests for public beaches all across the state, and we found out that a number of public beaches, they don't have permits. They don't even think they need permits.
Yep.
Yet the private citizens are being told by the thousands that they have to have permits.
Yeah, and for me, that's a lot of heartburn. I think we need to be very careful. I believe, working in government as I do, that we don't cross lines like that, and that, as I said, and this is the other thing that I felt we ran into, and that was, if you challenge some of this stuff, then therefore you just want to throw all the rules away and just let everybody do whatever they want, and that wasn't the case for
Right.
myself, and I certainly didn't see that with either one of you. There's certain rules that are good to have in place. It makes sense. We understand what we can and can't do, but at the end of the day, when you have one entity, the government, being able to do a lot more than the private citizen with its own private land, we got to be very careful with that, and I'm going to defer to the private sector a little bit in this case, and the private landowner, because I am concerned that a lot of landowners' rights have been eroded through
Right.
regulation.
To this day, the Detroit District Corps of Engineers, I believe it's in their regional permit, they still have a double standard. They say that public beaches should be treated separately because they're serving the public, and so therefore they have different standards. And I agree with you. I don't think that's right.
Well, especially when you get to if you get to the environmental regulation side of it, or the, I guess, save the planet at all costs side of it, it doesn't make sense to me that if it's that critical that you can allow it here, but you can't allow it there because we have to more or less save the ecosystem.
Yep.
If it's that critical, then it should be everywhere. And I don't agree with it being that critical. I think there are some ways we can compromise a little bit, not compromise in the sense of bad environment, but compromise in the private land ownership. Compromise in the fact that let's really focus on good, true, solid wetlands versus sandy beaches.
Yep.
That's where the compromise is. And again, I just felt like as we went through the process somewhat, those that would be opposed to what we were trying to do couldn't debate us on that issue. They would try to make it look like we're trying to do everything
And on that
without any
note,
regulation.
you know, when we talk about the environmental groups and how they approached what Save Our Shoreline was trying to do, you would have thought that we were out there putting all kinds of stuff out into the water. I mean, the people who own properties on the Great Lakes are probably a bigger environmentalist than the people that don't own that property. I mean, the last thing I would want to do is have something that I caused on my beach that would affect my grandkids or my parents. I mean, those are the two people that are at risk from having exposure to an unhealthy beach. And by moving the sand, we found that the best way to deal with E. coli, which is a concern for us, especially in Saginaw Bay, is to get that sand turned so that the sun can break down the E. coli and make that shoreline safe enough for my kids to go out there and play.
Now, with with the way the debate was framed and moving forward, did you find over your way, because I know in testimony we had some folks ask questions. We had some senators that actually asked the question of some of the people testifying,
Yep.
if they actually owned beach frontage, the ones that were opposing what we were trying to do. And ironically, what we found was many of the folks, I'm not suggesting all, because I'm sure there's some folks that own beaches that probably agreed with the tighter regulation or somewhere, but it seemed to me that for the most part, a lot of the people complaining about where we were trying to go with this were people that didn't own beach frontage, really had no vested interest in it other than the environmental side of things.
Right.
And they were the ones testifying, in a sense, as experts of what needed to be done for the beaches, versus what you were saying, Ernie, about the people that own the beach frontage. They're the ones that have the concern about making sure they're not destroying something.
And in our early years, we did have a few people that were on the shoreline that wanted to leave their beaches natural. But what they were missing was the fact that we had this plant called Phragmites that was taking hold. And so what would happen in the early years, if they had a party in front of their home, those people would go to the neighbors where the beaches were clean to enjoy the beach. They never used what they had because of all the growth. But now at this point, I would say it's pretty safe to say that the bulk of the beaches in our immediate area are in pretty good shape.
Yeah, even the people that left their beaches vegetated, they found out that that vegetation was in fact Phragmites. And so once they got the accurate information, which I think we helped bring to the debate, now they're cleaning that Phragmites off their beach and they have clean beaches again.
And that was one of the issues for us in the Upper Peninsula, was because we've got the Phragmite problem just as well as you do. And what I noticed was, because of the rule or the regulation side of this thing, a lot of beach owners, I think, were a little bit concerned about, can I touch it, can I touch it? And instead of taking action, they were taking no action,
Yep.
which helped perpetuate the whole Phragmite invasive species problem, versus if we'd have been grooming our beaches, keeping them healthy and beautiful, we could have probably offset a lot of the spread of the Phragmite the way it did. Now we do have a pretty major problem with Phragmite. It's also an issue that some of the folks over in the Traverse City area are concerned about,
Yep.
in the sense they believe we might be going down the wrong path as far as the Phragmite issue is concerned. But having talked to some of the folks up my way, they claim there's multiple ways to deal with the Phragmite, and it's one of the things we're going to work hard on up in the Upper Peninsula with my constituents, and maybe you could share on that a little bit of how we get to the heart of that and deal with it. I think we all want to make sure that gets taken care of, whether you were for the beach grooming or not. I think we all agree that we need to deal with that issue.
Yep.
It's an issue that is real frustrating to me, because we hear from one side of the debate that the only way to deal with Phragmites is to use chemicals. And if you come to our area, you're going to see, number one, you're going to see our beaches, which have been groomed, and there's no Phragmites on those beaches. And you know, other than pulling sand down occasionally, we don't have to work those beaches hard in order to keep the Phragmites away. So that's one issue. The other issue is mowing. In like near Ernie's house, people aren't getting the permits to groom, so they're mowing. And they've been mowing for a long time, and they don't have Phragmites in front of their house.
Yeah, they're in front of their house. They'll have 30 feet of sand coming off their seawall. They'll have another 30 feet wide patch of what looks like a fairway on a golf course, and then they have another 30 feet of sand going to the water's edge. And so with them mowing that somewhat on a regular basis and keeping that vegetation down, there's no sign of any Phragmites anywhere. But where you stop that mowing and you stop doing any kind of soil grooming, the Phragmites are all over.
A third example is over at the Bay City State Recreation Area in the north 1,200 feet, which Ernie actually is grooming, I heard, just about every weekend now.
Yeah.
But that was almost solid Phragmites. And several years ago, Ernie got the community out there. They removed all the Phragmites and returned that to a beach. And it is a beautiful beach today. So even though it was fully inundated with Phragmites, it's now a beautiful beach that the community can enjoy.
Yeah, when we did our cleanup, I know Dave Powers was there, and we had a little video of a lady and her daughter that came down the boardwalk that they have at the park, and she's at the end, and she was just ecstatic that she can now see the bay. And what made it really come home is the lady that was so happy was in a wheelchair. You know, and it's about, you know, serving the public in a lot of different ways. She didn't care to go into the sand. She didn't care about going into the water. She just wanted to be able to see it. And with the Phragmites being where they were, there was no vision of the water. You couldn't see.
Let me ask you then, Ernie, because one of the issues that was brought to my attention on the, again, on the opposition of this, was that if you groom your beaches and you don't chemically treat the Phragmite, you're perpetuating the problem, and that it's growing and your neighbors are going to be dealing with it because you're helping to spread it. What do you say to that?
Well, if you maintain the shoreline to start with, the rhizomes, which are the roots, are never going to be able to take hold.
Right.
You know, that's the biggie. And, you know, with them saying that us grooming the beaches would cause a rapid growth of it, we have thousands of acres of wetlands all around in Bay County. And those thousands of acres are predominantly Phragmites. And I don't know anybody that owned a tractor or any mechanical devices that went back into that acreage that caused those Phragmites to take hold there. So I'm not on that side of the coin that what we're doing on our beach is going to cause them to continue to spread.
And there are a lot of studies, even from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that say there are lots of effective ways to deal with Phragmites, and chemical is one of them. But
Yep.
plowing, disking is an effective way. Mowing is an effective way. And we put some of those studies on our SOS website so that people that are interested in that issue can go to our website and get that information.
Because it may be that you're an older couple, and for you to go out and mechanically groom the beach might be a hardship. So like in our area, especially where we've got people that are in their 80s, there's a local company that they can call, and they'll come out and they'll put a program together where they'll spray with chemicals, and they'll come in and they'll cut the Phragmites down, and they'll maintain it for a couple of years to make sure that those rhizomes are gone. Myself, we don't know today if there's going to be an issue with the chemicals 3 years from now. And with my kids and grandkids, I choose to go the other option.
Yeah, you know, the chemical thing I find a little bit ironic, because the people that are pushing them would be the people I dealt with that were
Right.
pushing them were the same folks that would want to save the environment at all costs. And again, I don't know enough about it, and they seem to be well versed in it. They were very comfortable with the chemical idea, but it just struck me a little funny, because at the same time, any other time you talk chemicals anywhere, it would be, there's no way on God's green earth that you're
Right.
going to deal with chemicals, and yet in
Right.
this case it was appropriate. So I saw there was it seemed a little different to me that to hear that was the only way to do it, number one, and that they were so promotive of it, that you got to just use the chemicals, if in fact, and I believe there is, other ways to mechanically deal with this.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about the process, because boy, we sure worked a lot together here, and I know my staff and others worked on this for, I think it was back in March when we introduced the bill. And the bill, by the way, is Bill 1052, Senate Bill 1052. Let's talk about the process. How did it start, and what was your involvement all the way through this? What was your take on it?
I mean, having this bill is the climax to everything that we've been involved with. You know, back in 2003, we had PA 14, which was a bill that, with the help of Ken Sigma, who was the Senate Majority Leader, he worked real close with us. And I think part of it was because every time he would go to a different city to have a debate on water quality and shoreline issues, SOS was there, whether it was in Port Huron, whether it was in Tawas. We actually had him come to our area in the Saginaw Bay so that he'd get a better understanding of what we were up against. So we had an ally there who helped us. The unfortunate thing was they put a sunset provision on our bill. So after 5 years, it was gone, and we had to start all over again. We've always had Band-Aids that we were able to accomplish, but we never had a final resolution that put it all to bed like the bill that you introduced and did for us. I mean, I can't tell you how happy my wife is that I won't be living and breeding, SOS, but it had been a long process. I mean, we had work groups. We took people up and down the shoreline in Traverse City, over to Caseville, and the unfortunate thing was there might have been 17 individuals in this work group. SOS was the only group that was in there that wasn't one of the environmentalists that was being paid to be there. That was always something that bugged me. Every time we had meetings, all of these people that we were working with were being paid. We just do it, because it's the right thing to do. So that was pretty frustrating for me. But
I think another important thing to point out is that back in 2003 when we passed that law, you were a supporter back then when you were in the House.
Yep.
And I remember coming in with Ernie and meeting with you at that time, and you were a great supporter at that time.
Well, I appreciate that, and just a side note to that issue, I remember that, and I remember then trying to get more of a statewide effort to move forward. And what I ran into back then was, that time, the administration did not want the Upper Peninsula included in this.
Yep.
And there was a threat of a veto if we actually pushed that issue, and I did not want to hurt at least the little effort that you had been working on to try and move forward with some of the resorts and stuff to clean their beaches up so they could have a business. We just felt like our hands were somewhat tied back then, but so that was the process then, and things have changed a little bit. So,
oh my gosh, talk about change. I mean, we had better than 2 years involved with working with legislators and environmental groups and meetings to get that PA 14. Here we come in March, and we sit down with you, and of course what did you call her, the Velvet Hammer?
my staff, Kendra's
Kendra.
just been great. She's
And
great.
we also have a lot to say for David Ladd,
Yep.
who worked real close with all the
did, yeah,
legislators
absolutely.
to make this happen. But to go from March to the 1st of July to have a bill, it's just, I get goosebumps because it happened. It couldn't have went any better than what it did, I think.
Well, to our viewers, we're running out of time. This has been a typical issue on this one because there's so much to talk about. So we appreciate our viewers coming in and hearing a little bit about what we've been dealing with. I want to thank my two guests for coming in, Ernie and Dave, both of you. It's really been a pleasure to work with you on this issue. And with that, I'm going to say farewell.
Have a good summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.